RadioShack, the store that smelled like possibility. The one where a kid could walk in with $5, disappear into a wall of little drawers labeled resistors, capacitors, and 555 timers, and walk out with the exact part that turned a half-baked idea into something that actually worked. The place that handed out free batteries once a month if you remembered to bring the little stamped Battery of the Month Club card. The store where the guy behind the counter in the blue polo shirt didn't just sell you a part. He asked what you were building, then handed you 3 more things you didn't know you needed.
Do we really need all this?
Yes!
Today we're talking about what happened to RadioShack, the chain that once taught an entire generation how to build things, then somehow decided it would rather sell them cell phone contracts instead. But before we get into the rise, the peak, and the long, strange freefall, hit subscribe and tell me in the comments what your strongest RadioShack memory is. The free battery card? The 101 science fair kit under the Christmas tree? The first time you realized the guy in the polo shirt actually knew more than you did? Now let's get into it. No need to dig through the bargain bin. This one's coming through clear. To understand why so many people still feel the loss like a missing tool on the workbench, you have to understand how perfectly the beginning was tuned. In 1921, 2 brothers, Theodore and Milton Deutschman, opened a tiny retail and mail-order shop at 46 Brattle Street in downtown Boston. They wanted to sell equipment to the brand-new hobby of amateur radio.
Radio began to revolutionize family life.
This is London calling.
An employee suggested the name RadioShack, borrowed from the little wooden room on ships where the radio operator lived. A shack for radios, literal, perfect. Their first catalog arrived in 1939. By the 1950s, they were selling private label products under the Realistic name, and customers in Boston had already started calling the place Nagasaki Hardware because so much of the merchandise came from Japan. Then Charles Tandy, the leather guy from Fort Worth who already ran Tandy Leather, bought the nearly bankrupt chain in 1963 for about $300,000. His board thought he'd lost his mind. What he did next was almost insultingly simple. He cut the product line from 40,000 items to 2,500. He replaced name brands with private label goods that arrived in those distinctive black and silver packages. He turned big stores into swarms of small ones, staffed by people who actually knew electronics. And he told managers they had to own a piece of their store, so they stayed hungry. Within 10 years, they were opening 2 new locations every working day. The 1970s turned RadioShack into the official supply depot of the CB radio craze. At its peak, Citizens Band radios were nearly 30% of the chain's revenue. Catalog pages filled with Realistic and Archer CBs. Store shelves packed with 40-channel units. Then came the move that should have locked them in forever. In 1977, they released the TRS-80, one of the first mass-market personal computers you could actually walk into a store and buy.
So this home accounting program goes into the RadioShack computer. Okay.
The machine itself sat on the counter. Full-stroke keyboard, 12-inch monitor, cassette deck for storage. 4 kilobytes of memory, a price that undercut Apple. Internally, they expected to sell 3,000 a year. They sold 10,000 in the first month and a half. Newspaper headlines announced the waiting lists. By the end of the first year, more than 50,000 units had shipped. For a brief window, half of every personal computer sold in America came from the same chain that still sold soldering irons next to the cash register. People called it the Trash 80, affectionately, the way you call your ugly dog by a mean nickname because you love it.
I took your ugly, broke-down dog, fixed it up, took some nice pictures, and relisted it on the market.
Well,
by the late 1990s, there were more than 8,000 RadioShack locations. Maps of the United States looked like they had measles. More locations than McDonald's in some counts. You could almost throw a stone and hit one. Store interiors still carried the old wall of components, but the front of the store was starting to fill with cell phone displays and Sprint and Verizon signs. And that is exactly when the story starts to tilt, because the same company that once sold half the personal computers in America slowly decided computers were someone else's problem. They exited manufacturing, they watched the internet happen, and treated it like a temporary fad.
Yeah. What could go on?
Their first real e-commerce site showed up in 1999, 5 years after Amazon. In consumer electronics, 5 years is a geological era. Instead, they bet everything on cell phones.
RadioShack keeps you in constant communication with their affordable, transportable cellular telephone.
Not building them, not innovating them, just selling the plans and the handsets for thinner and thinner margins, while every carrier store did the same thing better. At one point, wireless was more than half their sales. The profit margins were terrible. The stores that used to be packed with curious hobbyists started feeling like phone kiosks with a sad little parts wall in the back. The wall of drawers that once stretched floor to ceiling shrank to a single cabinet. Employees who had once been proud of knowing the difference between a resistor and a capacitor were now written up if they didn't try to sell a phone to the person who only came in for batteries.
But you better buy now, because I got another guy who's really interested. He'll be by here any minute. What do I got to do to make this a deal for you, huh? Throw in my mother-in-law?
They tried everything else too. Incredible Universe, a giant big box concept whose empty parking lots became local news. The QCat barcode reader, a $35 million marketing disaster that arrived free in the mail and immediately went into drawers never to be used, rebranding as The Shack in 2009.
How do you feel about RadioShack changing its name to The Shack?
I think that would probably be better, yeah.
Are you going to call it that?
Probably not, no.
RadioShack should be called RadioShack.
Complete with new logo and commercials that tried to make the name sound cool. Launching Do It Together as a half-hearted attempt to win back the DIY crowd after years of training staff to ignore them. By 2014, the losses were stacking up like unpaid invoices, 11 straight quarterly losses. Newspaper headlines announced the delisting from the New York Stock Exchange. In February 2015, RadioShack filed for Chapter 11.
RadioShack, which traces its roots back 94 years, plans to sell 1,500 to 2,400 stores to its largest shareholder, Standard General.
Court documents listed the remaining stores. The empire that once taught America how to solder was suddenly for sale in pieces. Another bankruptcy followed in 2017. Most of the remaining locations went dark, their red and black signs still hanging over empty storefronts. The brand got passed around like a slightly embarrassing family heirloom until an El Salvador-based company that already ran RadioShack stores in Latin America took control in 2023. A handful of independent stores still somehow exist in small towns, clinging to the old logo and the old inventory like time capsules. The name lives on online and in wholesale. But the RadioShack that mattered, the one where a kid could walk in with $5 and walk out with the parts to build something that didn't exist yet, that version is gone. It didn't die because technology changed. It died because it stopped being the place that helped people keep up with the change. It became just another middleman at the exact moment middlemen started going extinct. The company that once sold America the tools to invent the future somehow couldn't invent a future for itself. There's a strange kind of poetry to it. The store that taught a generation how to solder ended up with a connection that finally came loose. And maybe that's the part that still stings. Not just the loss of a retailer, but the loss of a mindset. The idea that if something broke, you could fix it. That if you didn't know how, someone behind a counter would show you. That the tools to understand the world around you were hanging on a wall for 99 cents. So what's your strongest RadioShack memory? The free battery card in your dad's wallet? The 101 kit that taught you more than school ever did? The first time you realized the guy in the polo shirt actually knew what he was talking about? Drop it in the comments. And while you're down there, check out some of the other videos on the channel about American institutions that vanished while we were busy looking at our phones. Because some stories don't just disappear, they leave a weird little adapter-shaped hole in the culture.